Hey everyone, welcome to session 121 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. This episode features a follow-up interview with Dr. Russ Harris. Russ and I recorded this episode about 3 or 4 weeks ago when the world's troubles centered around the challenges with COVID-19 related stay-at-home measures. It's amazing how fast things have changed since then. In light of the social upheaval as people in the United States and beyond come to grips with tragic examples of racism and injustice, getting irritated by one's family members pales in comparison in terms of personal suffering. And I had briefly thought to shelve this podcast episode in light of this contrast. But the more I thought about it, I believe that the suggestions and thoughts that Russ shared on this episode will be helpful nonetheless. During our conversation, I decided to open up a bit and really share some things that were bothering me at the time of the recording. I did so not to cry, woe is me, but rather to mirror some of the challenges and frustrations that many of my friends and colleagues have shared with me, all in the service of giving Russ some material to work with, as it were. So I hope you find that helpful. And speaking of, Russ actually puts me on the spot and walks me through some specific exercises. He was also kind enough to share with me additional guided exercises, the dropping anchor one in particular, one of which I'll play at the very end of this episode, so you want to stick around through the end. These exercises are available for download, so you can go to the show notes of this episode and I'll have links available to them there. Along the way, Russ fielded a few listener questions, and in the process, we talked for a little bit about helping kids get back to school in the fall, or I guess springtime if you're in Australia like Russ is. As always, the links to the resources we discussed are in the show notes over at behavioralobservations.com. So this podcast is brought to you with generous support from Behavior University. Behavior University's mission is to provide university-quality professional development for the busy behavior analyst. Learn more about their CEU offerings and podcast-specific discounts over at behavioruniversity.com/observations. We're also brought to you by HRI Recruiting. Bart Voss has been placing BCBAs in permanent positions throughout the U.S. for just about a decade, and has been doing this line of work for 30 years more generally. When you work with HRIC, you work directly with Barb and you get a highly personalized service. So if you're about to graduate, or if you're looking for a change of pace, you're considering a move, or if you just want to know if the grass really is greener on the other side, check out hricolorado.com to schedule a confidential chat right away. Lastly, I'd like to mention something I don't bring up all that frequently. I do have a membership program for the podcast. Think of it like a DIY Patreon. It's been running for a few years now. Members get access to a private Facebook group in which they are able to get nearly instantaneous access to the videos of these podcast interviews. This episode in particular has been available, since we recorded it, almost a month ago. You get the raw feed, so there's no introductory comments, no ads, no nothing. Even some of the bloopers and do-overs. We've had a few in this particular episode, as a matter of fact. You just get right to the interview. Another cool thing we do is that we hold Zoom hangouts with former guests every now and then. And so we schedule a Zoom call. The former guest comes on, and members get to pick their brain directly. So if you want to learn more about that, go to behavioralobservations.com/membership. All right, one last thing, I promise. I would be remiss if I didn't take a minute to sincerely thank Dr. Antonio Harrison, Kirk Kirby, Sean Capel, Larry West, and Pierre Lewis for contributing to the last episode. If you didn't get a chance to check it out, pause right now and give it a listen. I can go on and on about how powerful that episode was, but suffice to say, it is hands down one of the best episodes we've put out. So go to session 120, titled Listening to Perspectives That Matter. Okay, let's get to this fun conversation with Russ Harris. So without any further delay, please enjoy this interview.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Dr. Russ Harris, thanks for joining me yet again for another conversation here on the Behavioral Observations podcast. Good morning to you in Australia. It's evening here in little old New Hampshire. How you doing?
Good, thanks. Thanks for inviting me back on the show. I've got my new technology. I've got my Blue Yeti microphone here. So
get some fancy headphones. You got all kitted out. That's awesome.
Well, one of the side effects of being stuck indoors for so long, you need some good technology for your online stuff.
Yeah, well, I think you hit on the theme that I wanted to talk to you about, actually, because we're all stuck indoors for the most part. I mean, some of the quarantine or stay-at-home orders are starting to partially lift here in the States, and of course, a lot of the there's local variations to that depending on where you are and depending on where you are in the world. It can be quite different. But to make a more general statement, there's a lot of folks who are being cooped up, who are either working from home or some folks who are not working, not by their choice either. A lot of at least here, again, speaking just from my point of view here in the United States, a lot of unemployment. It's really, really high. People are at home. Kids are not in school. So there's a lot of things that are really kind of stressing people out. And
it's the same deal here in Australia. Yep.
Yeah, and I know you had some writings about this not too long ago, some things that you posted, and so I figured it'd be an opportune time to pick the brain of Russ Harris and talk about what are some healthy ways we can at least attempt to maneuver through these really unusual, difficult times that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm happy to chat about that. Sounds good.
And just by way of background, we were chatting about this real briefly before we hit the record button. We had originally, just to kind of clue the audience in or give them a little bit of backstory here, you and I had scheduled to speak a few weeks ago, and then something came up. We weren't able to do the interview, and so here we are a couple of weeks later doing it. And I think my point of view on this whole thing has changed considerably in that span of time, and I think that at first I was like, oh, this is okay, this is different, and I can manage and things like that. And I think as this quarantine has kind of ground along, it's really starting to grate on me big time. And so I don't want to turn this into an online therapy session or a public I guess display of whatever's going on with me. But I think some of the experiences are shared by a lot of folks as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Everyone's fed up with it. Everyone.
Yeah. So, I mean, the things that I'm hearing from folks are again, it's a lot of stressors from, being kind of forced out of their routine. A lot of folks are being forced into close quarters with their family when, the normal.
That's torture.
I know.
It's like, even the most loving of families, you need a break. It's when Jean-Paul Sartre said, hell is other people, he had a point. It's amazing how frustrated you can get with the person you love most on the planet.
As the saying goes, the struggle is real for sure. And and so those are some things that are just kind of on my mind. So I just kind of wanted to see. I know you've got not only your own point of view from kind of what's going on in Australia, but your online presence is pretty considerable. What is your perspective just in terms of the ways in which people are either managing or not managing that you're seeing from your, again, point of view?
Well, so obviously how people are managing, really a major factor in it is the position of privilege. If you're privileged enough that you're well off, that you've got a big house, that you still got employment, you're obviously going to cope with this a whole lot better on average than someone who's lost their job or who's living in a small cramped apartment with a huge family. And I think, I'm I'm lucky. I live in a nice neighborhood, and most people are comfortably off. And as I kind of talk to the neighbors, most of them are kind of coping quite well with it. But I've also spoken to people that are in really much more difficult situations, and particularly if you have lost your job, or if you don't know how long it will be before you can get back to work, or you're really struggling financially, then that just adds a whole new level of kind of suffering and stress. And the most disturbing situations are the ones that we're hearing about all the kind of increase in domestic violence. It's even those of us with the most loving families, we get frustrated and snappy and irritable with each other. And, how that plays out when you've got families with a history of violence cooped up for weeks on end is very disturbing.
Yeah. I'm seeing there's no shortage of news stories about those, the increases in calls to, child protective services and other types of, things like that. So, we're seeing the same thing here. I think you really hit the nail on the head with the privilege piece. It seems to be like there's two different worlds. I think experiencing this pandemic. There's I kind of find myself somewhere in the middle. I'm kind of some people I always joke around. I actually do have a day job. I am a practicing behavior analyst, and I've been out of work since the middle of March, and I likely won't get much in the way of any type of billable work until the school year resumes in September. And I'm not saying that to kind of cry in my beer or anything like that. The privilege piece of that is my wife is still working. We live below our means. We've responsibly budgeted over the years and things like that. So we'll be fine. It's inconvenient and it's caused us to kind of reshuffle our priorities and things like that. But we'll be okay in the long run. Whereas at the same time, I have colleagues and acquaintances and things like that, both within behavior analysis and out, who who are completely wiped out, starting from scratch and things like that. So yeah, the privilege piece is huge in terms of the variable that allows one to kind of get through this. In terms of being out of work, one of the things I think that the monetary piece aside, at least one thing that's kind of really started to grate on me is that, I'm lucky enough to kind of really love what I do. And I feel like one of my biggest reinforcers is now kind of taken out of my repertoire or routine, or I'm not allowed, it's the response is blocked. And that's been a bit of a challenge to deal with.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I'm sure, I would imagine virtually everybody listening to your podcast is the same thing. Our work is so rewarding for us, and it's I mean, we're really talking about grief here for most people. It's kind of it's people often think about grief in terms of losing a loved one, the person you love died. But when you lose a job that you love, or when you lose your freedom, or when you lose access to your community, these are important losses. And of course, if you're unfortunate enough to actually lose someone in the traditional sense of the term, that they actually die through this, people are struggling with many different losses here. And grief, as you know, is not an emotion. It's a psychological process, and during which time we experience a whole range of different emotions. So while there's a lot of fear and anxiety around, there's also anger, and then there's sadness, and there's frustration, and then guilt. If you're in a position of privilege, a lot of people are struggling with guilt about all the people that are worse off than them, and it's just layer upon layer.
Yeah, I mean, I even feel guilty. Like my wife is like, on Zoom calls or Google Meets from from morning till evening, and I feel like I'm doing, obviously, doing things around the household and whatnot. I'm not, walking around in a bathrobe, or, eating cereal out of a box, but there's numerous ways. So as you're the author of my favorite ACT book, which is The Reality Slap. It's the book I've given away the most to other people. So this is a reality slap for many of us, for sure. So I'd love to get your advice in terms of how people can make the best of this, get through it. Use what are some principles that that we can be aware of, or maybe on a tactical level, what are some things that we could do on a daily basis to kind of get through this as best as possible. So I'll just kind of tee that up for you to take a big swing at. So.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's like the whole world's had a reality slap, haven't they? It's we've never experienced this before. And so, reality slap is a term. I'm not sure if I invented it, but I certainly have popularized it. This idea that, reality slaps you in the face and turns your world upside down. And how do you deal with that? And, I think one of the most useful things is to focus on what's in your control. When reality slaps us around, we feel like things are out of control, because actually they are. There's so much that's out of our control, just in normal everyday life. But when our world gets turned upside down, we're very much aware of it. And with this corona thing happening, we can't control what happens to corona. You can't control whether your next door neighbors wash their hands. You can't control what happens to the economy. So what can you control? And in the ACT model, there's a massive emphasis on focusing on what's in your control. You have very little control over your feelings. You have very little control over your thoughts, but you do have a massive amount of control over your arms and your legs and your mouth, over your physical actions, what you do with your body. There's in a lot of ACT books, they take you through this little thought experiment. Someone puts a gun at your head and says, don't have any negative thoughts, don't have any worries, don't have any anxious thoughts. Can you control your thoughts? They say, don't have any difficult feelings, don't have any feelings of anxiety or fear. Can you control your feelings? No way. They say, all right, now dance like a penguin. Could you do that? Absolutely. You could dance like a penguin even if you felt like a complete idiot. You can still control your arms and legs and dance like a penguin. So this kind of what we have most control over is our physical actions, what we do with our arms, our legs, our hands, our feet, the words that we say and how we say them. And if we start there, what are little things that I can do with my arms and my legs and my words in my day-to-day life? That's a good start point.
I see. It's the silliest thing occurred to me the other day, and one of the things I think that it was an accomplishment. I felt like one of the things I think has been a challenge is like even though the time is a little bit more abundant than it was previously, I think a lot of these kind of challenges that you listed off a few minutes ago, I don't know, make it hard to kind of get up and do those things, and I remember the other day being very proud of myself because I stripped the covers off the bed, washed them, dried them, and put them back on. I was like, yeah, like I felt like I had written a book or something like that, or it's just
well, it's great that you got a sense of accomplishment from that, because it's not just about taking control of your actions. It's also about making sure they're aligned with your values, and so you can do any activity on automatic pilot, or you can do an activity with a sense of resentment and grudging, I hate doing this, I don't want to have to do it. You can do it out of a sense of a compliance, and following the law or following the rules or pleasing other people. And none of those are particularly satisfying. But if you do it out of a sense of commitment, I'm doing this in line with my values and behaving like the person I want to be, I'm doing this in the service of something that matters, there's a different quality to it. So, if we come back to the idea of social distancing and hand washing, those are things that are in my control. They're actions I can take. But I can do that caught up in the story like, oh, this is such a pain. Why do I have to do this? I hate doing this. Or I can do that in line with my value of caring. I'm doing this because I care about myself, I care about my family, I care about my community. And each time I keep that distance, each time I wash these hands, I'm living that value of caring. It doesn't magically turn it into fun, but it gives it a different quality. The difference between compliance and commitment is huge.
I see. If someone, we've got new audience members joining the show all the time, and so they might not have had the benefit of hearing your earlier appearance on the show or some of the other ACT shows that we've done with other guests. So you mentioned values, and so particularly for those audience members who might be new to this sort of thing, what are some things, so taking steps in service of your values requires perhaps the identification of what's important to you in the first place. So what are some tips for the kind of ACT novice to figure out what is indeed important to them?
Okay, so let's imagine that we interview the person that you love most on the planet, and I say to this person, I say, what are your three greatest qualities? What would you like them to answer? Then I kind of ask, when you were going for a really rough patch, or you're going for a really hard time, when you were really struggling, how did this other person treat you? What kind of things did they say and do? And your answers to those questions will give you a lot of information about your values. If you would, in your ideal world, have this person say that your three greatest qualities were that you're loving, that you're kind, that you're patient. Well, those are like your values. Your values are your heart's deepest desires for how you want to behave as a human being. How you want to treat yourself and others and the world around you, the kind of qualities you want to put out into the world through your actions. There's lots of other little exercises, but I just think that's a particularly useful one. Often, if there are parents listening, it's often useful to do this kind of, imagine one of your children, they're being interviewed live on national television, and the presenter says, what were mum's three greatest qualities as a mother? Or what was dad like when you were really struggling in life? What did he kind of say and do for you? That will... So I think pretty much everybody has values around caring, caring for yourself and caring for others. So even if you're not quite sure what your values are, you can pretty much take that for granted as one of them. So what are little ways of caring for myself and caring for others? And how can I put that caring into my actions in these difficult times, particularly with all the tedious, painful stuff?
Are you in need of continuing education? Well, Behavior University is a BACB approved continuing ed provider, and their mission is to provide university quality courses and ABA for new and experienced professionals alike. Their live webinars generally have a limited number of attendees so that the learning experience is highly interactive. And if you can't make the live events, these webinars are recorded and available in Behavior University's CEU library for later viewing. Behavior University also has a 40-hour RBT training. This self-paced course uses a combination of visual presentation, audio lectures, and live video models to teach all areas of the RBT task list. The course is accessible anytime and from anywhere. So if you'd like to learn more, head on over to behavioruniversity.com/observations, where you'll find a 10% discount for podcast listeners. Again, that's behavioruniversity.com/observations, and thanks for checking them out. Yeah, that's definitely a great start. And speaking of tedious, difficult stuff, you kind of foreshadowed this a minute ago. Being in this proximity with kids who are, or spouses who will get under our skin or get on our nerves at things like that. What do you have any advice for those, those those people in those situations to kind of manage those, those private events or maybe sometimes public events that of frustration, anger, etc. What would you suggest to someone whose husband has left his stuff all over the place for the upteenth time, or the kid who hasn't picked.
There are husbands that do that, really?
I have heard. I have it on good authority from someone who lives with me that that's the case. So.
Okay, very, very rare occurrences. I'm sure.
I know. Yeah, of course.
Well, look, two things. One is kind of self-compassion, and the other is dropping anchor. So let's start with dropping anchor. That's emotional storms blow up. Difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions. And when we get jerked away by those emotional storms, there's nothing effective we can do. If a ship's in the harbor and a storm is blowing up, the first thing that ship or boat needs to do is drop an anchor. If it doesn't drop an anchor, it's going to get swept out to sea or damaged really badly. And so it's the same thing when our emotional storms blow up. We need to drop anchor, and it's so that this kind of emotion and all the thoughts and feelings that go with it doesn't sweep us away and pull us into those kind of destructive, problematic behaviors that we so readily do. So there's a nice simple formula for dropping anchor. ACE, ACE. The A is for acknowledge your thoughts and feelings. The C is for connect with your body. And the E is for engage in what you're doing. So let's begin by acknowledging our thoughts and feelings. So if listeners just want to do this right now, just take a moment to acknowledge, what are you thinking? What kind of thoughts are showing up for you right now as you listen to this podcast? And acknowledge what you're feeling. What are you feeling in your body? Any particular feelings, sensations anywhere? And just see if you can silently put that into some words. I'm noticing anxiety, or here are some thoughts about what Russ is saying, or I'm noticing some knots in my stomach. Just a short sentence that kind of acknowledges what's going on there. And then the C is for connect with your body. Remember, we're kind of focusing on what's in our control, and we've got a whole lot more control over our actions than our thoughts and feelings. So let's acknowledge the thoughts and feelings, and then let's connect with our body. So listeners, if you're able to move your body in some way, if you're not driving a car or operating machinery, then maybe stretch your arms, move your arms around. If you're sitting in a chair, try sitting forwards, push your feet into the floor, straighten your back. See if you can stretch or move in some way. Get a sense of this body. It might take a breath and notice your lungs moving. You might move your neck around, kind of shrug your shoulders a bit, but something that helps you connect with your body. So we're acknowledging our thoughts, we're coming back into our body, and then the E is for engage in what you're doing. Rather than getting caught up in your thoughts and feelings, focus your attention into what you're doing right now. In this case, listening to this podcast, bring all your attention to it. What are you doing right here, right now? So let's just run through that without all the instruction. So just, again, everybody, acknowledge your thoughts and feelings. What kind of thoughts are popping up? What are you feeling in your body? And just use a short sentence to describe that. I am noticing, or here is. And now come back into your body. Straighten your spine, have a stretch. Take a breath if that's useful for you. Stretch or shrug or move. Get a sense of your body. Notice you've got control of your arms and your legs. You can take action. And finally, engage in what you're doing. Bring your attention back to what you're doing right here, right now. There's thoughts and feelings showing up. There's a body you have control over, and there's an activity that you're doing that's important. Focus on that. And the idea is that you run through that as many times as you need. Just keep going through the ACE formula. Often 30 seconds is enough to kind of ground and center you, but sometimes you may need to do that for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, just over and over. Acknowledge, connect with your body, engage. Acknowledge, connect with your body, engage. So it's a very simple mindfulness practice. I would say it's the simple mindfulness practice to teach anybody, anywhere, anytime.
I see. My wife and I have actually tried to and teach the kids to do some of this stuff. My kids are tweens and teens, and it's like we're asking them to chop a cord of wood or something like that. They're very reluctant to do, and they think it's like, this is dumb. This is, and they have all those kind of really skeptical reactions to this. They don't understand why the results are, perhaps not, direct or tangible. Do you have any advice in terms of maybe trying to encourage other people to do this who may not be as bought into this process as others?
Well, look, firstly, I wouldn't use the word mindfulness, because that's becoming a really dodgy term. And, at my son's school, they teach mindfulness. And he says to me, "Oh my God, Dad, it's so boring. It's so dull. It's nothing like what you do." They make us kind of do mindful coloring in a book, or they make us kind of, or they make us close our eyes and focus on our breath, and everyone just falls asleep. So, don't use the word, but also what if you participate in that little exercise, you can see that's really easy to do. Doing a meditation practice where you focus on your breath is really hard and really boring for most people. And in fact, it's even contraindicated in acute trauma. Lots of people in acute trauma, if they close their eyes and do mindfulness meditation practices, actually get worse. Same in acute depression. So what's nice about dropping anchor is it gets you active, it gets you moving, it gets you focusing. And it's just really easy to do. So what you want to do then is sell it to your kids in terms of, let's have a look at what happens when these thoughts and feelings show up normally and you get jerked around by them. What do you tend to do? What kind of results does it have for you? Does it make your life better or worse? Now, do you want to learn a different way of dealing with them that can have better results for you, get you more of what you want in life, help you, and so kind of sell it in those terms. But having said all of that, my son gives me a hard time about it too. So, "Don't do your act stuff on me, Dad." So
I guess there are some things that are universal, right?
It's it's kids' job to rebel against their parents, isn't it? And
Yes, indeed. All right, very cool. I know we got just 20 minutes or so left here. So, I'm sorry. Were you going to go on?
Sorry.
Yeah, please go right ahead.
So the other side of it is self-compassion. Again, a really dodgy term that's often misunderstood. But self-compassion basically means, if you're looking for a 6-word definition, it means acknowledge your pain and respond with kindness. So you kind of acknowledge this is hard, this is difficult, and you respond in a kind way. A lot of us beat ourselves up. The inner critic comes out and starts getting stuck into us, and you lose your temper with your kids, and then you start beating yourself up over it. A lot of us do not treat ourselves kindly when we're suffering. You may turn to drugs or alcohol or comfort eating or distraction, but those aren't kind ways of treating yourself. So it is hard. It's hard for everyone. It's as we've said, some people are doing it much harder than others, and particularly if you've got kids that are playing up at home with difficult behaviors. Boy, that is challenging. So be kind to yourself. You will. I'm sure you'll lose your temper at times, or you'll fall back into some of those self-defeating patterns that you said you were never going to do again. Of course, but beating yourself up, I say to my clients that beating yourself up was a good way to change behavior. Wouldn't you be perfect by now? Totally. And so I get resistance to this concept from people, this idea of being kind to yourself. It's like, well, if I'm kind to myself, that won't help me change. It's like, I'm just going to keep doing it. Well, So I always use that old analogy of the donkey. I'm sure all your listeners have got a pet donkey, and they use the donkey to carry their load to market every day. Donkey's big in the USA. Everyone's got one in Australia.
Not where I live, even though I do live pretty rurally.
And so, there's two ways you can motivate your donkey. You can motivate it with the stick, you whack it and it'll carry the load to escape the stick, or you can motivate it with carrots, carries the load and you give it a carrot. And over time, the battered donkey gets more and more miserable and depressed, whereas the donkey that you motivate with carrots gets healthy and happy and gets really good night vision. So when people are beating themselves up, they're like that battered, bruised donkey. Sometimes it motivates them, but a lot of the time it just makes them feel stuck and depressed. So we've got something in it that's much better than carrots. We've got values. Let's use values to motivate you to change your behavior or do the things you want to do. And let's kind of acknowledge this is hard and be kind to ourselves when we're in pain. It's kind words, just acknowledging this is really hard, this is really difficult. Kind deeds, I get clients to experiment with the idea of just kind of placing a kind hand on your body. And if you're listening to this and if you've got the opportunity to do this and it's not dangerous because you're not driving or doing brain surgery or something, then just take one of your hands and turn it palm upwards. And imagine that this hand is filling up with kindness. You've used this hand in kind ways to help other people. Maybe you've helped out a friend with a task, or maybe you've held someone's hand when they were crying, or you've rubbed someone's shoulders, or you've cuddled a crying baby. See if you can put that sense of kindness into your hand. And I'm going to give you two options. One is you can either rest it gently on top of your heart, or you can rest it on wherever you're feeling pain or discomfort in your body right now, if you've got some uncomfortable feelings showing up. So whichever you prefer, either resting it gently on your heart, you're going to give this a go, Matt, or resting it, or on top of, if you can feel a pain, particularly somewhere like tightness in your shoulders or knots in your tummy, place it over that area and just let it rest there gently on your body. If you don't really want to touch your body, you can hover just above the surface and see if you can just send a sense of warmth and kindness inwards. And this is usually more powerful if you're actually touching your body, because you actually feel the warmth coming out of your hand and sending it inwards into your heart, sending it up to your head and down to your toes. And wherever you encounter some painful feelings in your body, any numbness or tightness or tension or knots, just sending warmth and kindness into those areas. So see if you can soften up around them, loosen up around them, and see if you can just say something kind to yourself that you would say to a friend that was in similar pain. This is really hard. And just wondering, Matt, what's that like for you I can see you're doing that.
It's I don't know. I have a lot of competing thoughts going on because I know I'm recording this. And I know I'm sharing with my audience as well. So, but yeah, I think the neat thing about this is that it's an active way to, when you saying earlier, be kind to yourself, that kind of like the term mindfulness and these other things, it can become like an empty phrase, if you will, and this turns it into more of an active response. So that aspect of it was definitely noticeable. Are you looking for a new job, but you're overwhelmed with all the emails that you're getting from various ABA agencies? What if there was someone who was in your corner and could help you find the perfect job placement? Well, that person exists. Barbara Voss has been working as a recruiter for over 30 years, and her company, HRIC, specializes in placing BCBAs in permanent full-time positions throughout the United States. Barbara has been placing BCBAs since 2011, so she knows our business, and she offers personalized service to any BCBA looking for a new position. She also helps companies looking to hire BCBAs too. Here are just some of the things Barbara can help you with. She can provide information about salary ranges in different markets across the country. She can help you write your resume. She can coordinate and prepare you for the interview process and even help negotiate the right salary for you. And best of all, there are no charges to any candidate for all of these services. When you're ready to make a change and want to work with someone who will listen to you and understand what you need in a new position, contact Barbara at HRIC. To schedule a confidential discussion, head over to hricolorado.com. Again, that's hricolorado.com, and hit the contact button to connect with Barbara. You won't be disappointed.
Well, it's kind of like there's lots of different ways of doing this, but the resistance I often get is like, well, this is just soft or weak, or how's that going to help? And when I'm presenting to emergency services or armed forces, I do not use the word self-compassion because I know there's a lot of people in those audiences that are going to go, "What's this girly crap?" Blah blah blah.
Yeah, I think you used the term "blokey bloke" the last time you were on the show, which was a new one to me. I had to Google that. But
blokey blokes. That's right. So were we talking about this last time, weren't we?
It just enough to mention the term. I think you've gone into a little more context here. So,
and I kind of say, look, you're going through a rough patch. There's lots of really difficult stuff going down. What kind of mate do you want by your side as you go through this? Do you want the kind of mate who's like, suck it up, stop your whinging, get on with it? What have you got to complain about? Just deal with it. Or do you want the kind of mate by your side who says, this is really rough. I've got your back. I'm with you every step of the way. I'm here for you. And of course, even the most blokey blokes are like they choose the second mate. That's the kind of friend you want at your side. And then the question is, so what kind of friend are you being to yourself right now? The way you're talking to yourself, the way you're treating yourself, is it more like the first or like the second? And how can you learn to treat yourself a bit like the second kind of mate?
Wow, that's very cool. I didn't expect to participate in this. This is I got a bonus out of this conversation. So I think the audience might get something. They'll learn something from it and perhaps get a chuckle out of it simultaneously. So it's a twofer. I got a couple of audience questions here, and I know we just have a few minutes left here, so I want to make sure you get to your next meeting on time. But there's one or two I would like to get some quick thoughts on, and then we can kind of wrap up with where folks can learn more about what you're up to these days. So one of my listeners, I'm leaving the name out here. She writes, as a brand new behavior analyst, trying to adapt to this remote learning thing while balancing family, being stuck at home, life stress. It's a very real thing. For my own mental health, would seeing a therapist who's trained in ACT serve me well? How can I find one that would, quote unquote, speak my language and not be heavy on talk therapy? What advice would you have for this listener?
I think a good ACT therapist for sure would be very helpful. Like any type of therapy, you're going to find therapists that are kind of do it really well and therapists that do it really badly. But someone who's kind of well trained in it and is up to date with it would be great. The best way to find that is via the contextual science website, www.contextualscience.org. And there is a bunch of you can find therapists all over the world there.
And we'll link to that in the show notes. So we got you on that. Just go to behavioralobservations.com.
Yeah.
And we'll have that. Okay. Rhiannon from New Zealand writes, how do we support students coming back who have not had structure and have had worries for the last 4 to 6 weeks? And at the time in which she wrote this, she said many places are canceling class for the rest of the school year. That's pretty much the way it is here in the States. We're live in-person classes is at least as far as I know, in most of the states here in America are done for the year. Everyone's doing kind of remote learning. There may be some pockets where that's not the case. I know class is resuming in other parts of the world, where it had been went online for some period of time. But yeah, I worry about that. Man, I'm a school-based consultant, and I work with kids with emotional behavioral challenges a lot. And I'm worried about these kiddos. Well, many of the kiddos I work with are in very challenging circumstances, kind of like what we discussed at the outset of this conversation. And school is the best thing going for them by far.
Well, I think, planning and preparation, anticipate all the kind of likely behavioral problems that you're to encounter. Make sure that parents and the kids are anticipating this too. When you start school again, these are the kind of things that we expect you're going to be struggling with coming back. There'll be difficult thoughts and feelings, and let's kind of agree on how we're going to handle that, and ask the kids. Get their input into it to empower them. What do you think might help if you're feeling agitated or frustrated, or if it's difficult to focus? What are some things? I guess the challenge to teachers is going to be to spice up your lessons a bit, keep them a bit more engaging and interesting, but also to take some breaks, build in little break routines into your classes, which is actually a good thing to do anyway, because people find it hard to focus for very long. I think it would also be great if schools can adopt some simple practical skills training that they do with the kids, like something like doing a drop-in anchor exercise for 2 minutes at the start of each lesson could be a fantastic way to help your kids start to get back in. And then if kids are getting frustrated, agitated, restless, difficulty, there's teachers have got all sorts of clever ways you can do this. Stand up and do a bit of stretching, or go for a 5-minute run around the playground and then come back in, or tap into your creativity, put on a bit of music, dance to it, play a funny video, but get little breaks in that help kids kind of take a break and then re-engage.
So would your emphasis be more on the staff preparation and training side versus student? Obviously it kind of goes hand in hand, but
I think it's going to be both, but definitely train up the staff, anticipate what are the challenges, how you're going to manage them, and preemptive is better. See if you can restructure your sessions so that they do start with some form of grounding or centering exercise, that there are breaks in the middle of the session, and that there are plans in place if kids are finding it difficult. I really can't think of anything that's simpler and easier to teach kids than dropping anchor, though.
Okay. Very good. All right, Rhiannon, thanks for that question. All right. So I know folks will be wanting a lot more information and things like that. So, if they like your stuff, where would you like folks to go to learn more about either, I know live workshops aren't a thing right now, but if you're doing any trainings or anything like that, or if if there's places where there's information about this stuff that you can direct people to, where would you recommend that they look?
Well, if they're wanting to do it more for kind of self-help, self-development, then I have online programs. My best known book is actually The Happiness Trap, and the website is thehappinesstrap.com. And I have an online course there that runs every few weeks, which kind of takes you through acceptance and commitment therapy, applying it to yourself as a kind of self-development, personal growth program. So that's a really good place to kind of learn these skills and learn the nuts and bolts of dropping anchor and self-compassion and living your values and all the other stuff. If you're looking at it more in terms of professional training, if you see this as something you might want to do with the clients that you're working with, then you'd want to do a professional course. So I've got lots of online trainings, lots of webinars. The best place to go is imlearningact.com. imlearningact.com, and you can find those there.
All right, Russ, I know you've got places to go and people to see virtually, I suppose. So I'm going to let you go for now, but thanks so much for joining me, and I look forward to chatting with you sometime down the road.
Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure. Notice your thoughts and feelings.
Notice what your mind is doing and what you're feeling in your body, and just acknowledge they are present. Now come back into your body. Push your feet into the floor, straighten your back, take a breath, get control of your arms and legs, move them around. And now expand your awareness to the world outside you. Open your eyes and ears, look around. What can you see and hear and touch and taste and smell? And consider, where do you need to put your attention right now to make the most of this moment?
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.